The slipspace portal opened at 0312 hours, and the UNSC Infinity came through it the way Infinity always came through things. With the controlled violence of a vessel that had been doing something the universe didn't entirely endorse, and had survived it through the application of engineering that was better than the universe's objections. The transition alarm cycled down. The hull stopped resonating. The bridge crew ran their post-jump assessments with the compressed professional efficiency of people who had done this hundreds of times and understood that the first 90 seconds after an unplanned exit were the 90 seconds that determined everything about the next several hours. Captain Thomas Lasky was in his command chair before the resonance fully cleared. Status: hull integrity nominal, shields at standby. Slipspace drive is... Lieutenant Commander Sparks stopped. Intact. The exit was clean. Whatever happened, we didn't damage the drive. Navigation. The pause that followed was the pause of a navigator running a stellar cartography match and getting results that required running it twice before reporting them, because reporting them once would require saying things that sounded like system malfunction rather than data. Sir, stellar cartography is returning no match, not against any catalog in our database, not uncharted, structurally different. The stellar distribution in every observable direction is inconsistent with any region of the Milky Way or any charted neighboring galaxy. Meaning, Lasky said. Meaning we are not in our universe, Sparks said. The specific flatness of someone reporting a fact they have verified 3 times and are now committed to having said out loud. The bridge absorbed this with the professional quiet of a crew that had been through enough anomalous situations to understand that the appropriate response to impossible information was to continue gathering information rather than spending time on the impossibility. Surface below us? Lasky said. Planet, breathable atmosphere, nitrogen-oxygen mix, pressure consistent with habitation. Surface temperature nominal, pre-industrial civilization. I'm reading population centers, road networks, agricultural infrastructure, settlement patterns consistent with medieval-grade technological development. A pause. No detectable equivalent to our technology anywhere on the surface. Another pause, longer, with the quality of someone looking at a reading and deciding whether to report it as data or as anomaly. Sir, I'm getting sensor saturation across approximately 30% of the band. It's not interference. The saturation has structure. It's distributed evenly through the atmosphere and surface geology. It reads as an energy field of some kind, but I don't have a classification for it. Closest match in the database? Sparks ran the comparison. Forerunner energy architecture, partial match only, 41% confidence. The mechanism is different, but the structural profile has parallel elements. She looked at him. Whatever it is, it's everywhere. It saturates everything on and above that surface. Lasky looked at the planet below, at the medieval civilization whose surface was producing, even through the sensor saturation, thermal signatures consistent with large-scale fires in multiple locations. Movement patterns consistent with military engagements. The distributed chaos signature of a world actively at war. Through the cloud layer, partially visible on the enhanced optical feed, mountain peaks reaching altitudes that the topographical data was flagging as extraordinary. One in particular, dominating the continental interior, reaching above the cloud layer into the upper atmosphere with the specific geological authority of something that had been the highest point on its landmass for longer than human civilization had existed. "Get me Halsey," Lasky said, "and get Master Chief." Here is what had happened 12 minutes before Infinity's arrival. It's above the highest mountain on Nirn's surface, above the peak that the people of this world called the Throat of the World, the sacred summit where the Greybeards kept their ancient vigil, and where the Thu'um had been studied and practiced for centuries. Alduin the World Eater had done something he had not done since his return from temporal banishment. He had committed his full power, not to a single target, not to a single dragon resurrection, to the mass resurrection that his campaign required. The simultaneous awakening of every ancient dragon burial mound within range of the Throat of the World. A Thu'um of such sustained magnitude that it had been resonating across the cosmological architecture of Orbis for 3 hours before it reached the frequency that had consequences nobody on Nirn had anticipated. The consequences were this: the Thu'um, operating at full cosmological magnitude, had vibrated the dimensional membrane between Nirn's reality and whatever lay beyond it, had reached through it, had found in the slipspace transit corridor that was the closest physical analog to a dimensional membrane that the adjacent universe contained, the most massive object in proximity to the contact point, and had pulled. Alduin had not intended this. The World Eater had devoured ages of the world. He understood the cosmological architecture of Orbis, with the comprehensive intimacy of a being woven into that architecture at its foundational level. He understood the Thu'um as the language of creation, the voice of Akatosh operating through biological vocal apparatus, the specific mechanism by which reality had been spoken into existence, and by which reality could be spoken into new shapes. He did not understand slipspace. He had no framework for it, and the dimensional membrane he had vibrated was not a thing he had known existed, because it was not a thing that existed within the cosmological architecture of Orbis. It was something from outside that architecture entirely, belonging to a different universe's physics, operating on principles that had no Orbis equivalent. When he felt the thing come through, when he felt the dimensional breach his Thu'um had created admit something vast from the other side, he stopped the resurrection and turned his ancient intelligence toward the sky. Something was there, large, metal, alive in the way that machines were alive, not with a soul, not with a spark of Anu or Padme, but with the specific living quality of something built by beings who were alive, and that carried their purpose in its structure, the way a weapon carried the intention of the hand that had forged it. He watched it take its position in the sky above his mountain. He watched the small things it sent to the surface below. He was patient. He had been patient across ages of the world. He could be patient for the time required to understand what this was before he decided what to do about it, and he returned to the resurrection, but he kept one awareness on the sky. The Dragonborn had been awake since before dawn, not because the summons had come. The Greybeard's call was hours away still, the specific sequence of events between the dragon attack at the Western Watchtower and the 7,000 steps not yet completed. The timeline of fate running at the rate it ran, which was the rate that the events required, rather than the rate that the Dovahkiin would have preferred. He had been awake because Helgen was 3 days behind him, and sleep had not been reliable in the 3 days since Helgen, which was understandable for someone who had spent those 3 days processing the specific information that Helgen had delivered. That the dragons were back, that he was Dragonborn. that the two facts were connected in a way that meant his life was no longer the life he had been living before Helgen, but something else, in something that fate had been building toward since before he was born, and that the building was done, and the structure it had built was him. He was sitting on the wall of Whiterun's outer approach when the sky changed. Not the dawn. The dawn had been changing the sky for an hour in the specific gray incremental way of Skyrim's early morning. Though the ash-filtered light of a sky that had too much volcanic particulate in its atmosphere from the throat of the world's geological activity, and that produced, as a consequence, a dawn that was less sunrise and more the gradual replacement of dark gray with lighter gray. What changed the sky was different. A star that moved, not the slow arc of a meteor burning in the upper atmosphere, not the drift of a distant planet catching the early light. The specific deliberate movement of something with velocity and intention large enough that the enhanced optical clarity of the high-altitude Skyrim air made it visible as a shape rather than a point even at orbital distance. A shape that was wrong for everything the sky was supposed to contain. Elongated, structured, the product of deliberate construction rather than natural formation. He watched it for a long time. He had grown up in Skyrim. He knew its sky the way anyone knew a sky they had been looking at since childhood. Knew its stars, its weather patterns, its auroras and its storm formations, and the specific quality of its light at different hours of the day. He knew what belonged in it and what didn't. That didn't belong. Farkas was beside him on the wall. The companion who had been with him since the Western Watchtower engagement, who had fought the dragon there with the specific committed courage of a warrior who found that not knowing what he was fighting was insufficient reason not to fight it. "Farkas," the Dragonborn said. "Yeah," Farkas said. He was also looking at it. "You see that?" "Been watching it for 10 minutes, Farkas said. "What do you think it is?" Farkas was quiet for a long moment. He was a Nord. Nords had a specific philosophical relationship with things that couldn't be explained. The relationship of a people who lived in a world where the cosmological was always just beneath the surface of the ordinary, where the gods occasionally walked among mortals, and the dead sometimes came back, and the stars occasionally moved in ways they weren't supposed to. The appropriate response to something that couldn't be explained was not denial. It was attention. Something that wasn't there yesterday," he said. "Yeah," the Dragonborn said. He filed it in the place where important things went that couldn't yet be addressed. He had a dragon to deal with. He had a graybeard summons to respond to. He had the specific crushing weight of being the Dovahkiin, pressing on him, with the accumulated urgency of everything that Helgen had set in motion, and that fate was not going to pause while he figured out what was in the sky. The moving star would have to wait. He turned from the wall. He was wrong about the waiting. Halsey arrived on the bridge 7 minutes after Lasky's summons, which was fast enough to suggest she had been awake rather than asleep, which was consistent with every experience Lasky had of Halsey's relationship with sleep in unusual situations. She reviewed Sparks' sensor data without speaking. The stellar cartography mismatch, the pre-industrial civilization profile, the energy field saturation, with the focused speed of someone reading in a language others were still learning. Her expression moved through phases. Initial assessment, recognition of the structural parallel to Forerunner energy architecture, the specific cold settling that happened when she encountered something that placed itself at the intersection of everything she had spent her career studying and everything she had not yet encountered. The energy field, she said. See, we can't classify it, Sparks said. No, Halsey said. You can't classify it because the classification requires a framework we don't have yet. She was already pulling up her own analysis terminal, cross-referencing the saturation data against the Forerunner energy architecture profiles she had been studying for 15 years. The structural parallel is real. It's not identical. The mechanism is completely different from any Forerunner technology I've studied. But the functional capability profile is... She stopped. It's what? Lasky said. Structurally equivalent, she said. Different mechanism, same functional output. Whatever saturates this planet's atmosphere interfaces with reality at the cosmological level, the same way Forerunner technology interfaces with reality at the cosmological level. She looked at the planet below with the expression of someone who had just identified the most significant research question of their career and was standing on a bridge rather than in a laboratory. Captain, whatever is on that surface, whatever the energy field represents, it is not primitive. Pre-industrial does not mean primitive. The civilization below us may not have our technology. They have something else. Something else comparable to Forerunner tech, Lasky said. Structurally equivalent, Halsey said again. Yes. Which means, Lasky said slowly, that when we look at a medieval civilization with no detectable advanced technology, what we're actually looking at is a civilization operating on a completely different tier of the same cosmological capability, Halsey said. One that looks primitive because we're looking for the wrong indicators. She pulled up the thermal signature data from the surface engagements currently in progress across multiple locations. They are at war, a significant one, multiple fronts, widespread engagement, large-scale military operations across the entire northern continent. She paused. And something else. The thermal signatures in the mountain range at the continental center. Above the cloud layer, at the summit of the highest peak, are not consistent with military engagement. What are they consistent with? Halsey looked at the data for a moment. Dragon, she said. The word landed in the room with the specific weight of a word being used literally rather than metaphorically. The thermal profile is consistent with a large flying creature producing sustained high-temperature output from a biological source. She paused. Multiple contacts, distributed across the continental interior. Multiple, Lasky said. Dozens, Halsey said, at minimum. Lasky looked at the planet below, at the pre-industrial civilization with medieval technology and a cosmological energy field equivalent to Forerunner architecture and dozens of large fire-breathing creatures active across its northern continent. Master Chief, he said. Ready, Chief said, from the deployment bay. He had been ready since the bridge call. He was always ready. Ground deployment, reconnaissance only. I need to understand what we're in before we commit to anything. Lasky paused. And Chief, treat everything on that surface as a potential threat until we know otherwise, including the things that look human. Understood, Chief said. He deployed. If you want to keep going for more crossover stories that rewrite history, hit that subscribe button and drop your crossover idea in the comments below. May the Force be with you. Master Chief landed 3 kilometers outside Whiterun at 0447 hours. The drop had been clean, a single-occupant insertion pod, modified for atmospheric entry without the standard combat drop signature, hitting the valley floor in the pre-dawn gray with the controlled precision of a deployment that had been calculated to minimize observable impact while maintaining full combat capability on landing. The Spartan 4 fire team had landed at 4 separate points across a 2-kilometer radius, establishing the sensor coverage geometry that Thalmor had designed for unknown environment reconnaissance: overlapping fields, no blind spots, continuous data feed to Infinity's tactical display. Chief ran his initial assessment in the first 60 seconds. The air was cold, thin at altitude but breathable at the valley floor. The specific quality of high-altitude pre-industrial atmosphere before the industrial processes that degraded it had been developed. The ground was frozen in the specific way of a northern climate in late autumn. Not deep winter yet, but the frost that preceded it. The ground hardened to the consistency that said the serious cold was coming and had sent this ahead as a notification. The settlement ahead was medieval: stone walls, thatched and shingled rooftops, smoke from cooking fires in the early morning, the movement patterns of a population waking to its morning routines, the specific distributed activity of a community running its daily operation before the day's demands fully asserted themselves. And guards, soldiers, the specific posture of armed people maintaining a defensive watch from wall positions, equipped with the weapons that a medieval military culture produced: bows, swords, shields, my armor that was iron and steel rather than polymer and ceramic composite, and that covered the body with the coverage that the metallurgical capability of the culture had achieved, rather than the coverage that the threat environment required. Chief noted the armor's gaps. He noted them the way he noted all tactical data, without judgment, with the specific professional attention that converted observation into operational awareness, befuddled in the category of information that might matter and that should therefore be held rather than dismissed. He also noted the quality of their watch. It was not casual. These were not soldiers going through the motions of a defensive posting that had become routine through the absence of genuine threat. They were watching the approaches with the specific heightened attention of people who had recently been reminded that the approaches could produce threats, and who had been reminded in a way that had reclassified their standard threat assessment upward. Something had happened here recently. Something that had made these walls feel less adequate than they had felt before it happened. He moved through the valley's approach terrain with the specific movement discipline of a Spartan operating in an unknown environment, using the natural cover of the frozen terrain, maintaining the sensor envelope, building the tactical picture layer by layer from the data the environment provided. "Spartan Kale," he said on the fire team channel. "Northern approach. What do you have?" "Livestock, agriculture, 3 civilians moving toward the south gate. No hostile indicators in the northern quadrant." A pause. "Chief, I'm picking up something on thermal. Large contact, dormant, low temperature differential, consistent with a biological organism in rest state. It's in the hills northeast of the settlement." Profile. "I don't have a match," Kyle said. "It's large, larger than any biological I have in the recognition database. The thermal distribution pattern is..." A pause. "It's not mammalian. The heat signature distribution doesn't match any mammalian profile. It's something else." Chief pulled up the thermal overlay on his HUD. at the northeast hills, at the large dormant contact that Kale's sensors had flagged, at the specific thermal distribution that didn't match anything in the recognition database. He filed it and moved toward the settlement. The south gate opened at 05:12 hours for the morning's first civilian movement, and Chief positioned himself at the edge of the approach road's natural cover and watched the gate's operation with the attention of someone building the behavioral model of a location before deciding how to interact with it. The guards changed watch. The civilians passed. The gate remained open. He stood and walked toward it. The guard challenge came at 50 meters. The specific halting command of a sentry doing his job in a language that Chief's translation suite had been working since deployment and had achieved a functional operational vocabulary sufficient for the basics of first contact communication. The guard was young, well trained by the standards his equipment suggested. The specific disciplined posture of a soldier who had been trained to hold his position and challenge unknown contacts rather than act immediately. Chief stopped. He raised his hands, slowly with the deliberate body language of someone who had done this before and understood that the first 30 seconds of an unknown contact determined everything about the next 30 minutes. The guard stared at him, at the green armor, at the height, at the weapons that were not any weapon the guard had a category for, at the visor that reflected the early morning sky without revealing the face behind it. The guard looked at the second guard. The second guard looked at the first guard, then back at Chief. What are you?" the first guard said. Chief's translation suite rendered it clearly. He processed the question and the several possible responses to it and selected the one that was most operationally useful in this specific first contact context. The response that was honest, non-threatening, and gave the guard something to work with. "A soldier," he said. The translation suite handled the output. "Looking for information." The guard stared for another moment. Then, with the specific decision-making logic of a guard who had been told the dragons were back and that the Dragonborn existed and that the world was apparently a place where impossible things happened now, and the appropriate response was to deal with them, rather than stand in the gate with your mouth open. He stepped aside. "Jarl Balgruuf receives visitors in Dragon's Reach," he said. "If you're looking to talk to someone who has answers." "Thank you," Chief said. He went through the gate. He did not reach Dragon's Reach before the dragon arrived. The warning came from the walls, a shout that carried across the settlement in the specific quality of a voice producing maximum volume because the situation required it, and because the speaker had been trained to produce maximum volume in exactly this situation. "Dragon! Dragon attacking the west wall!" Chief was in the market district when the shout went up. He turned. The dragon was banking down from the cloud layer with the specific aggressive velocity of something that had done this before. Its scales the gray-brown of old stone, its wingspan throwing a shadow across the market stalls that was large enough to register as a weather event rather than a biological one. Its eyes had the cold intelligence of a being that had died once and been returned to the world by a force older than the city it was currently attacking. And it moved with the specific, deliberate purpose of something that had a target and had committed to reaching it. It hit the west wall with a fire breath that turned 3 soldiers into the specific aftermath that sustained high-temperature biological combustion produced. banked with the fluid efficiency of a flying predator that had been practicing aerial combat for centuries, and came around for the second pass with the cold patience of something that was not in a hurry, because it had calculated that the outcome was already determined. The Whiterun guards were responding, not away, toward it. The specific courageous insanity of soldiers who had been told the dragons were back and had decided that the appropriate response to that information was to close with the threat rather than away from it. They were running to the west wall with bows and swords against a flying ancient creature whose biological armor had been developing for thousands of years, and the math of bows and swords against ancient biological armor was not math that produced favorable outcomes for the bows and swords. Chief assessed the target. The dragon was approximately 15 meters long, flying at an altitude of approximately 40 meters above the west wall on its second approach vector. The Hydra launcher on his back had a targeting solution that his HUD was already computing. The specific firing solution geometry of a weapon designed for aerial target engagement, running its calculations against a target profile that didn't match anything in its target library and was producing a solution based on the closest available analog, which was large aerial vehicle with organic surface composition. He deployed the launcher. He acquired. He fired. The missile hit the dragon's left wing joint at the specific point where the wing's primary structural membrane connected to the shoulder joint, not the most armored section of the dragon's profile, and the HUD's targeting solution had found it through the combination of thermal mapping and structural analysis that the Hydra's guidance system performed in the 1.3 seconds between launch and impact. The result was not what the dragon expected. The scales absorbed a portion of the kinetic energy. The shaped charge component did not require full kinetic penetration. It required proximity, and proximity it had achieved. And the detonation at the wing joint produced a force transfer that the wing's structural integrity could absorb in part and could not absorb in full. The specific physics of a warhead calibrated for vehicle destruction, making contact with biological armor, calibrated for sword and arrow resistance. The dragon screamed. It was not a roar, not the combat vocalization of a predator expressing aggression. The specific surprised fury of something that had just discovered that the rules it had been operating under had changed without its knowledge, that the world it had been resurrected into contained a threat that its millennia of combat experience had not prepared it for. It turned toward the source of the impact. It saw Chief. Chief was already acquiring the second solution. The Dragonborn came through Whiterun's gate at a run 4 minutes after the dragon's first fire breath hit the west wall, because 4 minutes was how long it had taken him to cover the distance from the outer approach where he had been watching the moving star in the sky, and running was how he covered distances when the alternative was arriving after the outcome was determined. What he arrived to was not the outcome he had been running toward. The dragon was not on the wall. The dragon was in the market district, grounded, not dead, not immobilized, but on the ground with one wing damaged in a way that was not consistent with any weapon in Whiterun's defensive inventory, thrashing with the specific angry physicality of a flying predator that had been denied flight by an impact it was still processing. Standing 40 meters from the dragon was something that was not in Whiterun's defensive inventory either. Green armor, standing at a height that was wrong for a human in any armor that Whiterun's blacksmith had ever produced. Holding a weapon that was not a bow or a sword or a staff. looking at the damaged dragon with the specific quality of attention that soldiers gave to threats they had engaged and not yet finished engaging. The dragon, between thrashing, turned toward the Dragonborn, and the Dragonborn felt it. The specific cosmological recognition that passed between Dovahkiin and dragon in every encounter. The acknowledgement of kindred nature that the dragon's ancient intelligence produced when it found a mortal vessel carrying what dragons carried. The dragon's soul reaching toward him across the market district with the specific inevitability of a thing that was written into both their natures and could not be revised. The dragon dove, and not toward the green-armored warrior with the unknown weapon, toward him. Because the green-armored warrior was a threat the dragon didn't understand. The Dragonborn was a threat the dragon understood completely, had been briefed on by Alduin's resurrection campaign, had been told was the singular mortal that the World Eater had identified as the only genuine danger to his plans. Kill the Dovahkiin. That was the operational priority Alduin had communicated to every dragon he had resurrected. Everything else was secondary. The dragon dove. The Dragonborn drew his weapon and held his ground with the specific committed quality of a warrior who had decided that standing ground was the correct response to a diving ancient dragon, and had made that decision clearly enough that his body was implementing it without the interference of the part of his mind that was pointing out the diving ancient dragon. Chief processed the target shift in the compressed time frame of a soldier who had been making decisions under fire since age 6. The dragon's new vector was no longer toward him. It was toward the new individual who had just entered the engagement space. The individual who had come through the gate at a run and was now standing in the market district holding a weapon and not moving. Not moving. Chief moved. Toward the dragon's blind spot, the approach arc that the fire team's sensor sweep had mapped as the zone the dragon's peripheral vision didn't adequately cover. The specific tactical geometry of a flying predator whose visual field had been optimized for aerial hunting, rather than ground-level multi-vector engagement. He hit the dragon's right flank at the moment of maximum dive commitment. The collision between MJOLNIR armor at full sprint and ancient biological plating producing a force transfer that interrupted the dive's geometry and sent the dragon into the market stalls rather than the Dragonborn. The dragon recovered. The Dragonborn used the recovery interval. He drew breath. He felt the Thu'um rising in him, the specific cosmological weight of the voice gathering in his chest with the compressed urgency of power that had been waiting since Helgen to be used at full commitment. The dragon soul in him recognizing the moment and responding to it with the ancient instinct that predated every human in his bloodline. FUS. Force. RO. Balance. DAH. Push. The unrelenting force shout hit the dragon mid-recovery with the specific cosmological authority of the Thu'um delivered by a Dovahkiin in the early stage of their power. Not yet what it would become, not the devastating force of a fully developed tongue, but real and genuine, and carrying the weight of a dragon soul, speaking the language of creation, at a being made of creation. The dragon hit the ground. Hard. It was not dead. It would not be dead until the Dragonborn absorbed its soul. That was how it worked. The specific cosmological requirement that made the Dovahkiin necessary in a way that nothing else was necessary. The fact that dragons could be grounded and hurt and incapacitated. but not permanently removed from existence without a Dragonborn to absorb what they were. But it was down and it was damaged, and the combination of Spartan missile fire and Thu'um had produced an outcome that neither of them could have produced alone. Chief looked at the Dragonborn. The Dragonborn looked at Chief. The dragon between them was burning. Around them, Whiterun survivors were staring at both of them with the specific wide-eyed quality of people who had just watched two impossible things happen simultaneously and were still running the assessment of which one was more impossible. "Nice shot," the Dragonborn said. Chief processed this for 0.4 seconds. "Your shout stopped it," he said. "Your weapon hurt it," the Dragonborn said. "That doesn't usually work." "Usually?" "Dragons are difficult," the Dragonborn said. "Conventional weapons don't do much. Whatever yours is, Hydra missile system," Chief said. "I don't know what that means," the Dragonborn said, "but it worked." "Your shout moved it," Chief said. "The Thu'um, that's what that was?" "Yes. It's a language." "The language of creation," the Dragonborn said. "Yes." The dragon died between them, not from the missile or the shout, but from the accumulated damage of both, combined with the specific physics of a creature that could be grounded and then finished. The soul absorption happened in the specific column of cosmological energy that accompanied every Dovahkiin's dragon kill. The ancient power cycling through him in the way that power did when it was finding its home, the dragon's essence drawn into the mortal vessel that was built to contain it. The Whiterun guards were staring, the market vendors were staring. Jarl Balgruf's steward, who had come running from Dragon's Reach at the first alarm and had arrived in time to see the end of the engagement, was staring with the specific quality of a political administrator trying to process an event that exceeded his administrative categories. "What are you?" the Dragonborn asked Chief. "A soldier," Chief said. "Where are you from?" Chief looked at the sky. At the specific point in the cloud layer above Whiterun, where Infinity's orbital position currently was. "Up," he said. The Dragonborn followed his gaze. To the sky, to the place in the clouds where the moving star had been, and understood, with the specific instinct of someone the gods had been preparing for something enormous, that the something enormous had just introduced itself in the Whiterun market district over a dead dragon's cooling body. "The star that moved this morning," he said. "That was your ship." "Yes," Chief said. "And you came down to—" "Reconnaissance," Chief said. "We didn't know what we were in." "Do you know now?" Chief looked at the dead dragon, at the soul absorption light still fading in the market district, at the Whiterun guards and the staring civilians and the steward with his administrative categories in ruins. "Getting there," he said. Elenwen received the Whiterun report at 06:23 hours, like she was in the Thalmor embassy's intelligence center, the specific room that existed in the embassy's floor plan as a dining room for lower-ranking diplomatic staff, and that was actually the operational hub of the Aldmeri Dominion's intelligence apparatus in Skyrim, because the Thalmor's relationship with rooms having official designations and actual functions had always been one of creative divergence. The report was from the Whiterun asset, detailed, accurate. Now, the Thalmor's assets were good. They had been recruited for analytical capability rather than simply for loyalty, and the Whiterun asset had the specific quality of someone who understood that the value of intelligence was in its precision rather than its volume. The report described the dragon attack. the green-armored warrior with the unknown projectile weapon, the Dragonborn's arrival and Thu'um deployment, the joint engagement, the dragon's death, the conversation between the green-armored warrior and the Dragonborn. It described the warrior's upward gaze when asked where he was from. It described the specific moment of the Dragonborn understanding, and it described, with the analytical precision that made the Whiterun asset worth her continued deployment, the communication device that the green-armored warrior had produced at the end of the conversation and had given to the Dragonborn. A small, rectangular object, smooth, producing a faint electronic hum at frequencies the asset had never encountered, that the warrior had pressed into the Dragonborn's hand with a brief instruction that the asset had partially caught. "Keep it on you. We'll be in contact." Elenwen set down the report. She looked at the wall of the intelligence center, at the monitoring crystal that was currently producing the secondary electromagnetic interference signature she had been tracking since dawn, the specific signature of the sky object in orbital position above Skyrim's northern continent. She was not an impulsive person. She was a person who had been working the Thalmor's objectives for decades with the patient, systematic commitment of someone who understood that the largest objectives were achieved through the accumulation of precisely executed small steps, rather than through dramatic gestures. But she was also a person who recognized when a small step needed to be executed immediately, rather than at the pace of standard operational tempo. She wrote 3 messages. The first to the Justiciar team in Whiterun. Maintain observation of the Dragonborn. Do not approach. Report all contacts with the Sky Objects personnel. The second to the Thalmor Scholarly Division in Solitude. I need a complete theological analysis of the Dovahkiin's specific capabilities and limitations. Priority, 24 hours. The third to the Aldmeri Dominion's diplomatic mission in Cyrodiil. A significant development requires your awareness. I am transmitting the initial intelligence package now. Await further updates. She sent all 3. Then she began preparing the intelligence operation that would, if executed correctly, give the Aldmeri Dominion access to the Sky Objects technology before any other faction in Skyrim understood what the Sky Object actually was. She had time. The Dragonborn would go to the Greybeards next. That was the sequence of events that fate had laid out for the Dovahkiin. The Greybeard's summons, the 7,000 steps, the acknowledgement of what he was. It would take days. Days was enough. She had built intelligence operations on less. Islasky received Master Chief's first contact report at 0700 hours and read it with the attention of a commander who had deployed a reconnaissance element and was receiving the reconnaissance element's data and building the operational picture that the data produced. The picture was this: medieval civilization confirmed. Active military conflict between at least 2 human factions confirmed. On Dragon threat active and ongoing. The Whiterun engagement had been the 3rd confirmed dragon attack on a human settlement in the past 48 hours, based on the thermal signature data from the orbital position. The energy field's nature remained unclassified, but the Whiterun engagement had produced the first ground-level evidence of what it might represent. The Thu'um, Chief's report on the shout, was precise in the way Chief's reports were always precise. Stripped of editorial commentary, describing exactly what had been observed without the framing that made observations fit inside existing categories. The Dragonborn had spoken 3 words: The words had produced a physical force effect. Kinetic displacement of the dragon, consistent with a directed energy weapon discharge. But the mechanism was not directed energy. The mechanism was vocal. The mechanism was speech. Lasky read that section of the report twice. Then he went to Halsey's station and said, "The energy field. The Thu'um. Are they related?" Halsey looked up from the analysis she had been running since the initial sensor sweep and said, "They are the same thing." She showed him the data. The field saturation is the ambient resonance of the Thu'um, the background presence of the cosmological mechanism in the atmosphere of a world where that mechanism has been practiced by living beings for thousands of years. The shout is the active application of the same mechanism. She paused. The Forerunner parallel holds at every level of analysis I've run. Captain, the people on that surface don't have technology. They have something structurally equivalent to Forerunner technology, operating through completely different means, producing the same fundamental capability. Reality manipulation, Lasky said. Reality manipulation, Halsey confirmed. The Thu'um doesn't move the target because it generates a kinetic force. It moves the target because it speaks movement into existence at the level of reality where such things are determined. She looked at him over her glasses. Our weapons work in this world because this world has physics. But our weapons operate at the physical layer. The Thu'um operates at the cosmological layer. The two are not equivalent. Meaning our weapons can hurt things here, Lasky said. But the things here can do things our weapons can't respond to. Precisely, Halsey said. The energy field our shields are designed to counter is physical energy. The Thu'um is not physical energy. If someone on that surface chose to use the Thu'um against this ship, our shields would be irrelevant, Lasky said. Our shields would be addressing the wrong problem, Halsey said. Lasky looked at the tactical display, at the orbital position, at the planet below, at the thermal signatures of dragon activity still active across the northern continent. The dragon in the Whiterun engagement, he said. Chief reported it was not killed by conventional means. The Dragonborn absorbed its soul. That's the actual kill mechanism. Yes, Halsey said, which means the dragon threat requires the Dragonborn to resolve, Halsey said. Specifically, individually, the sole being in this world who carries the specific capability that makes permanent dragon destruction possible. She paused. Which is an extraordinary single point of failure in a world that has multiple active dragon threats. And the largest dragon, Lasky said. The one at the mountain. The one that's been resurrecting the others. Alduin, Halsey said. She had been pulling linguistic data from the intercepted communications that the sensor array had been gathering since arrival. The specific names that the surface population used, with the specific weight of names that referred to something cosmologically significant rather than merely culturally significant. The World Eater, in the mythology of this world's northern culture, the destroyer of ages, the being that ends each era of the world by consuming it. She looked at Lasky steadily. He came back. He's been resurrecting his army, and the Dragonborn is the specific and singular being that the cosmological architecture of this world designated to stop him. How developed is the Dragonborn? Lasky said. Early stage, Halsey said. Based on the Whiterun engagement data, the shout was powerful, but not at its potential ceiling. He's at the beginning of what he's capable of becoming. She paused, which means Alduin is acting on a timeline. He wants to complete the resurrection campaign before the Dragonborn develops enough power to stop it. Lasky looked at the tactical display, at the timeline, at the single point of failure that was also the only weapon that actually worked. "Get me a channel to the Dragonborn," he said. Chief left him a comm unit. "Find the frequency." "Already done," the weapon said, from the nearest terminal. "The comm unit Chief provided is active. I've been tracking its signals since deployment." A pause. "My Captain, while you were briefing with Dr. Halsey, I've been running my own analysis of the surface communications. There are 3 distinct intelligence networks active in Skyrim's political landscape. 2 are the military factions in the civil conflict. The 3rd is different, more sophisticated, operating on encrypted channels at frequencies that suggest dedicated intelligence infrastructure rather than standard military communication. Who is it?" "I don't have a cultural identification yet," the weapon said. "But their communication traffic has been focused on 2 specific subjects since our arrival." A pause. "Us and the Dragonborn." Lasky absorbed this. "They know about us. They have been monitoring our orbital position since arrival," the weapon said. "Their monitoring capability is not technological. It appears to be the energy field infrastructure, some kind of scrying network built on the ambient Thu'um field. They can't read our systems, but they can detect our presence and our surface deployments." Another pause. "They moved assets toward the Dragonborn's position immediately after the Whiterun engagement. Master Chief intercepted those assets before they reached the Dragonborn. He has not yet reported this in his contact summary." "Why not?" "He found something in the assets documentation that he is currently assessing before reporting," the weapon said. "I am inferring this from the delay between his engagement with the assets and his standard reporting interval." Lasky looked at the comm. "Chief," he said. "Sir," Chief said from the surface. "What did you find?" A pause. "Intelligence documentation. The 3rd faction. The weapon has been tracking. They have a partial assessment of our capabilities, built from observation since our arrival. It's incomplete, but it's accurate about the broad strokes." A pause. "They also have a dossier on the Dragonborn, classified above whatever their standard field operative clearance is. This came from their central command rather than local assets. It calls him the most significant individual threat to their long-term objectives, since a crisis they refer to as the Oblivion Crisis." Another pause. "Their operational directive is to acquire him before his capabilities fully develop. Not kill. Acquire. Use him as a tool. They want to control him," Lasky said. "And through him, potentially us," Chief said. "The documentation makes the connection explicit. They want to be the faction that controls the relationship between Skyrim's politics and whatever we are." "Where's the Dragonborn now?" "Climbing the mountain," Chief said. "The 7,000 steps. He's going to the Greybeards, the master practitioners of the Thu'um. They summoned him this morning." A pause. "I'm moving to intercept his route. The 3rd faction has justiciar teams. That's what they call their field operatives. That may be ahead of me on the approach route." "Handle it," Lasky said. "And Chief, stay with him after the Greybeard meeting. I have a feeling we need him to understand what we are before he goes further up that mountain." "Agreed," Chief said. He moved toward the 7,000 steps. The Greybeards received the Dragonborn at the summit of the 7,000 steps in the specific way they received everything. With the absolute stillness of beings who had been waiting for something long enough that when it arrived, the waiting simply ended rather than resolved. The way a held breath ended rather than resolved when the moment it had been held for finally came. The Master Arngir spoke for the four of them, because the others could not speak without the Thu'um in their voices, tearing apart everything in the immediate vicinity. He was old in the way that men became old when they had spent their entire lives at altitude in the cold doing one thing with complete dedication. The specific weather durability of someone whose physical condition had been shaped entirely by the practice of what they practiced, and the Thu'um in his body having modified him over decades in the way that any sustained cosmological force modified the vessel it operated through. He looked at the Dragonborn. He looked at Master Chief. He looked at Master Chief for a long time. "You are not of Nirn," he said, not an accusation. The specific flat statement of a man who could read the cosmological architecture of living beings through the Thu'um's sensitivity to the field saturation, and who had just read something that did not fit the field's standard profiles. "No," Chief said. "You came through the World Eater's discharge," Arngir said. "The dimensional breach. We felt it from here. The Thu'um resonating beyond the boundaries of Orbis, a vibrating something that should not be vibrated." He looked at Chief with the specific assessment of a master practitioner examining an unknown element in his cosmological framework. "You are not a threat to the Thu'um, but you are not comprehensible to it either. You exist outside the field's architecture, present in the world, but not of it. A stone dropped into water that the water cannot fully register." "That's accurate," Chief said. Arngir looked at the Dragonborn. You brought him." "He was already here," the Dragonborn said. "He fought the dragon at Whiterun." "I know," Arngir said. "We felt the engagement. The Thu'um you deployed, the unrelenting force, it was clean, stronger than your training accounts for. The dragon soul you absorbed was your third." He paused. "You are developing faster than any Dovahkiin in the recorded history of this order." "Is that good?" the Dragonborn said. "It is necessary," Arngir said. "Alduin's resurrection campaign is ahead of our projections. He has raised 17 dragons in the past 48 hours. The ancient burial mounds across Skyrim's eastern range are empty. Their occupants are active and deployed across the northern holds." He looked at the Dragonborn with the weight of a man delivering a timeline that had no comfortable framing. "You have weeks, perhaps less, before the resurrection campaign reaches a scale that the Dovahkiin's individual capability cannot address through direct engagement." "What do I do?" the Dragonborn said. "You learn Dragon Rend," Arngir said. "The shout that was built specifically to defeat Alduin. The ancient heroes forged it at this summit. Gormle, Feldir, Hakon, from the concept of mortality itself. The mortal experience of finite existence forced into a Thu'um that a dragon cannot process without being brought to ground." He paused. "We do not know Dragon Rend. It was a mortal shout, built from mortal experience, comprehensible only to mortal tongues. You will need to find the wall where the heroes spoke it into existence." "Where is it?" "Skuldafn," Arngir said. "Alduin's own temple, on the eastern range. He will know if you approach it." He has been guarding the portal to Sovngarde, the realm of the honored dead, because that is where the final confrontation must occur. He has been consuming the souls of the honored dead to fuel his return to full power, and the portal is where his campaign converges with its conclusion. He looked at the Dragonborn steadily. Getting to Skuldafn without alerting Alduin requires either exceptional speed or a distraction of sufficient magnitude that his attention is drawn elsewhere. The Dragonborn looked at Chief. Chief looked at the Dragonborn. The specific geometry of what Arngir had just said assembled itself in both of them at approximately the same moment. The operational shape of a problem that had one obvious solution, and that the obvious solution required them to have a conversation they hadn't had yet. "In your ship," the Dragonborn said. "Yes," Chief said. "It's sufficient magnitude." "That depends on what Alduin does when he engages it," Chief said. "Our weapons can hurt him. They can't kill him. He knows this from the orbital engagement. He disengaged on his terms, not ours. If he decides to ignore the ship and focus on you..." "He won't," the Dragonborn said. "He can't. The ship is a dimensional anomaly, something that came through a breach his Thu'um created. He pulled it here. That cosmological connection means he has to address it. It's woven into the fabric of Orbis." He paused. "Arngir, is that accurate?" Arngir was quiet for a moment. The quality of a man running the cosmological calculation that the question required, the specific scholarly precision of a lifetime study being applied to a question that had never existed before, because the situation that generated it had never existed before. "The World Eater's connection to the breach is real," he said. "He created it." In the cosmological architecture of Orbis, creation carries responsibility. The creator of a dimensional anomaly is the party designated to resolve it. If the anomaly remains open, or its contents remain in Nirn's reality, Alduin cannot fully complete his resurrection campaign without addressing it first. He paused. "You are correct. He cannot ignore the ship indefinitely. The cosmological pressure of the unresolved breach will compel him toward it. Then the distraction is available," the Dragonborn said. He looked at Chief. "Your captain needs to know this." Chief activated his comm. "Chief to Infinity. Lasky, I need you on this channel." Lasky's voice came back immediately. "Go ahead, Chief. We have a tactical picture. The Dragonborn needs to reach a location called Skuldafn on the eastern range without Alduin detecting the approach. The ship can provide the distraction. Alduin is cosmologically compelled to engage the anomaly rather than ignore it. But the engagement will require the ship to sustain Alduin's attention under fire while the Dragonborn reaches the target." Chief paused. "The ship cannot kill Alduin. The engagement needs to last long enough for the Dragonborn to find the shout he needs and reach the portal to Sovngarde. We don't have a timeline on that yet." Lasky was quiet for a moment. Then, how long can we sustain an engagement with something that rewrites physics through speech and is learning our targeting patterns in real time?" "Unknown," Chief said. "Halsey?" Halsey's voice came through the channel. "Based on the first engagement's data, Alduin adapts to each targeting solution in approximately 12 minutes. We can generate new solutions, but the generation rate has a ceiling. After sufficient engagements, his adaptations will have covered enough of our solution space that our effective targeting rate drops below the threshold required to maintain his attention." She paused. "I estimate 4 to 6 hours of tactically meaningful engagement before he disengages on his own terms. "Is 4 to 6 hours enough?" Chief asked the Dragonborn. The Dragonborn looked at Arngir. Arngir's expression moved through the assessment that the question required. "Skuldafn is 2 days' travel on foot. The portal to Sovngarde." "I don't have 2 days," the Dragonborn said. "No," Arngir agreed. "You don't." He looked at Chief. "The being from beyond the stars, your vessel, it travels through the sky." "Yes," Chief said. "Can it travel to the eastern range?" Chief understood the question's implication before it was fully formed. He activated the comm. "Lasky, the Dragonborn needs extraction to the eastern range. Approximately 200 kilometers. Can we deploy a Pelican for personnel transport?" "In a world where flying reptiles that breathe fire are active across the airspace?" Lasky said. "Yes," Chief said. A pause that had the specific quality of a commander running the risk calculation at speed. "Keel, prep Pelican 7 for atmospheric insertion. Maximum speed transit, low altitude approach to minimize dragon detection window." A pause. "Chief, if any of those dragons engages the Pelican..." "I'll handle it," Chief said. Outstanding," Lasky said, with the dry precision of a man who had been working with Master Chief long enough to know that this was an accurate statement rather than an optimistic one. The Thalmor justiciars intercepted the Dragonborn's descent from the 7,000 steps at the high mountain pass above the tree line. Not the first intercept team that Master Chief had neutralized on the ascent, but the second element that Elenwen had positioned as a contingency against exactly the possibility of the first team's failure. 4 operatives, higher clearance than the first team. The specific Thalmor field grade that was deployed when the primary asset was irreplaceable, and the operation was important enough to justify the diplomatic exposure of failure. They did not reach the Dragonborn. Thus Chief had anticipated the contingency, because reading an opponent's operational doctrine from a single engagement was a skill he had developed over 20 years of fighting enemies who had contingency plans. And the first team's precise intercept position had told him enough about the Thalmor's operational methodology to project the second team's likely placement. He had positioned himself ahead of the projection. The second team found him waiting at the pass. The engagement lasted 40 seconds. Afterward, he searched the team's documentation with the methodical attention of someone who had learned that intelligence gathered from neutralized assets was worth the time spent gathering it. The second team carried more than the first. Higher clearance documentation, a more complete version of the intelligence package that the first team had been carrying, and something that the first team had not had. A communication crystal, active, yet warm to the touch. The specific warmth of a scrying device that had been recently used and had not yet cooled from the energy expenditure of its last transmission. He held it carefully and examined it with the specific attention of someone handling an object that operated on principles he didn't fully understand, but that the weapon might. He photographed it and transmitted the image to Infinity. "I see it," the weapon said through his earpiece. "Give me a moment." A pause. Longer than the weapon's pauses usually were, which was itself information about the complexity of what she was analyzing. "It's a communication device. Operates on the ambient Thu'um field. Uses the field saturation as a transmission medium, which is why it didn't show up as a distinct signal source in our monitoring. It's been transmitting to a fixed point. I can backtrack the transmission path through the field gradient." Another pause. "The receiving point is a structure approximately 43 kilometers northwest of the throat of the world, Large building. Dense Thu'um field concentration around it, probably shielding. Multiple personnel. "That's the embassy," Chief said. "The Thalmor embassy," the weapon confirmed. "And Chief, I've been running the field gradient data since I identified the communication medium. Every monitoring crystal in the Thalmor network transmits through the same medium, which means I can read the entire network." A pause with the specific quality of a pause before significant information. "I've been reading it for the past 4 hours. I have the complete intelligence picture of the Thalmor's Skyrim operation. Their assets, their objectives, their communication history." Another pause. "Including communications that went to the Aldmeri Dominion Central Command in Somerset." She paused one final time. "So Captain Lasky needs to see this." Chief looked at the documentation in his hands, at the communication crystal, at the specific shape of a situation that had added a dimension it hadn't had when the Greybeards meeting began. He transmitted the full take to Infinity. He went to find the Dragonborn. The Pelican descended through Skyrim's cloud layer at 1440 hours with the specific controlled velocity of an atmospheric insertion vehicle being flown by a pilot who had been told that there were dragons in the airspace and had calibrated her approach accordingly. Low, fast, using the terrain for cover in the way that Pelican pilots use terrain when the airspace above it was hostile. The Dragonborn was in the troop bay. Master Chief was beside him. The Dragonborn had been quiet since the Thalmor intercept. The specific internal processing quality of someone who had received information that restructured his understanding of the political landscape he had been operating in and was running the implications before the next thing required his attention. He had read the documentation that Chief had translated and summarized. The Thalmor's assessment of him as a threat to their long-term objectives, like the operational directive to acquire rather than eliminate, the specific theological language of a faction whose objective was the unmaking of the mortal plane. "They want to end the world," he said, not a question. "Their version of ending it," Chief said, "different from Alduin's version. They want to unmake the mortal plane and return everything to a pre-existent state. Alduin wants to consume it and begin a new age with himself as the dominant force." He paused. "Different methods, a similar outcome for the current population. And they wanted to use me to do it faster," the Dragonborn said. "You're the most powerful individual in Skyrim right now," Chief said. "Possibly on this planet. Anyone with long-term objectives and the analytical capability to identify that fact is going to want to either use you or remove you. Including your people?" Chief was quiet for a moment. "Lasky wants Alduin stopped. That's the honest answer to that question." He paused. "Yeah, what happens after Alduin is stopped is a separate question that he hasn't given me an operational directive on, because we didn't know it was going to be relevant when we arrived here." "And if he did give you a directive?" "I'd tell you what it was," Chief said. "That's the honest answer to that one." The Dragonborn looked at him. At the visor that reflected the interior of the Pelican's troop bay, without revealing the face behind it. But at the soldier from beyond the stars who had hit a dragon with a missile and fought beside him in the Whiterun market district, and neutralized 2 Thalmor intercept teams without being asked to, and had not, in any of the interactions they had had so far, told him anything that subsequently turned out to be false. "What are you?" he said. Not what he had asked in Whiterun, not the category question. The deeper version of it, the one that meant, What is your nature? What made you? What are you built to do? Chief considered the question with the specific, careful attention he gave to questions that deserved accurate answers. I was taken when I was 6 years old, he said, by the military, enhanced physically, cognitively, reflexively, trained for 20 years. I've been fighting wars since I was a child. He paused. What I am is a product of what humanity does when it's afraid. It builds the best weapon it can and hopes the weapon is also something more than a weapon. He paused again. Whether I am is a question I've been working on for a long time. The Dragonborn was quiet for a moment. You were chosen, he said. Same as me. Different method, different chooser. He paused. Neither of us picked it. No, Chief said, and neither of us is done with it. No, Chief said. Cyril, the Pelican banked through the Eastern Ranges approach corridor, and the terrain outside the viewport shifted from the gray lowland plains to the specific broken highland geography of the mountains east of Windhelm. Ancient stone, deep ravines, the burial mounds of the dragon dead that Alduin had been emptying across the past weeks, their stone seals broken and their contents risen and deployed. Skuldafn is 2 kilometers ahead, the pilot said. I'm reading heat signatures on the approach. Large biological contacts, at least 4. Put us down a kilometer out, Chief said. I'll work the approach. There will be dragons in the air over Skuldafn, the Dragonborn said. Yes, Chief said. That's fine. The Dragonborn looked at him. I've been doing this since I was 6, Chief said. Above them, in Nirn's orbit, Lasky was reading the weapons intelligence package from the Thalmor communication network. He read it the way he read intelligence packages that had significant implications, completely without pausing for the implications until the reading was complete, because the implications needed to be built on the full picture rather than the partial one. The full picture was this. The Thalmor Justiciar's Skyrim network was the most comprehensive intelligence apparatus on the continent. Assets in every hold in both Civil War factions, in the College of Winterhold, in the Companions, in the Imperial government. The network had been running for decades. Its objectives were the long-term Aldmeri Dominion strategic goals that Halsey had identified in the theological analysis. The unmaking of the mortal plane through the destruction of the towers, the cosmological anchors that maintained Nirn's existence as a physical reality. The network's infinity-related communications showed that Elenwen had correctly identified the ship as a potential accelerant for those objectives within 40 minutes of arrival. The complete intelligence package she had been preparing for transmission to the Aldmeri Dominion's Central Command included accurate assessments of Infinity's weapons capability, shield architecture, and power systems, and, most significantly, a theoretical analysis of the structural parallel between Infinity's Forerunner artifact and the Thu'um field. The theoretical analysis had been produced by the Thalmor Scholarly Division in solitude in 18 hours. It was accurate, more accurate than Halsey had expected from a pre-industrial magical civilization, running an analysis of technology they had observed through scrying crystals rather than direct examination. The analysis concluded that the Forerunner artifact's resonance with the Thu'um field represented a potential interface point between the technological cosmological manipulation of the UNSC universe and the linguistic cosmological manipulation of Nirn, a bridge between 2 different implementations of the same fundamental capability. And the analysis proposed that if the artifact's resonance could be amplified through deliberate Thu'um interaction at the interface frequency, specifically, like through the coordinated shouts of multiple master tongues directed at the artifact simultaneously, the resulting energy output might be sufficient to damage or destroy one of the towers. Lasky read this section twice, then he called Halsey. "The Thalmor's scholarly analysis," he said. "The artifact Thu'um interface proposal." "I've read it," Halsey said. "Nay, it's in the package." "Is it accurate?" Halsey was quiet for a moment that had the specific weight of a scientist giving a question the consideration it deserved rather than the answer that would be comfortable. "The theoretical framework is sound," she said. "The specific mechanism they've proposed for amplifying the artifact's resonance through coordinated Thu'um interaction is... yes, it's accurate. Under the right conditions, with the right participants, the interface would produce an energy output at the cosmological level." She paused. "What they intend to do with that output, the tower destruction objective, is a different matter. The artifact's resonance, amplified correctly, would produce cosmological energy. Where that energy is directed is a question of intent rather than mechanism. Which means the artifact is a weapon in the wrong hands," Lasky said. "The artifact is a key," Halsey said. "In the wrong hands, it opens the wrong door." She paused. "In the right hands, what does it open in the right hands?" Lasky said. Halsey looked at the artifact on her analysis table. At the fractured resonance nodes that had failed during the first Alduin engagement, at the data she had been gathering on the Thu'um field saturation since arrival. "I'm working on that," she said. Skuldafn was guarded, not by soldiers, by dragons. 4 of them on the approach, 2 circling the temple complex itself, their patrol patterns overlapping in the specific geometry of a defensive deployment that had been designed by something that understood aerial coverage architecture. Alduin's resurrection campaign had produced an army, and the army had been deployed with the organizational intelligence of a commander who knew that the one location that could not be compromised was the portal to Sovngarde. The chief worked the approach with the Spartan 4 fire team in the coverage geometry that the terrain permitted, using the ravines and the broken highland stone for the angles that gave the Hydra launchers solutions without requiring the kind of exposure that 4 patrolling dragons above an open approach would punish. The Dragonborn worked alongside him, not in the Spartan geometry. He didn't know it, and learning it in the middle of an active approach was not an effective use of available time. He worked his own geometry, reading the terrain with the specific instinct of a warrior who had been moving through Skyrim's hostile landscape since before Helgen, and who had developed, through that movement, the specific capability of finding angles and cover and timing windows in complex terrain faster than formal training would have produced them. The first dragon went down to a Hydra solution at 300 meters. The second went down to the Dragonborn shout. Fuse, row, dash again, I grounding it, followed by Chief's follow-up fire that finished the engagement before the third dragon's patrol circuit brought it back into visual range of the engagement site. The third and fourth were harder. The third had observed the first 2 engagements from altitude and had revised its approach accordingly, staying higher, using the cloud layer for cover, diving only when the targeting angle was degraded. A chief ran the calculation and determined that the solution required drawing it into a closer engagement range than the Hydra's optimal envelope, and drawing it in required giving it a target that was more immediately threatening than the covered positions. He stepped into the open. The dragon dove. He fired at the dive's midpoint. Not the optimal range, but the range where the targeting solution intersected with the dragon's committed attack vector. The specific geometry of a weapon deployment timed not for ideal conditions, but for the conditions the enemy's behavior created. The impact sent the dragon into the ravine to his left. The fourth was the Dragonborn's. He had been watching the fourth dragon's patrol pattern since they arrived. The specific attentive observation of a warrior who was learning an enemy's behavioral pattern before engaging it, and the same attention he had been building since the third Whiterun shout that had knocked him backward and that he had been integrating ever since. He waited for the specific moment in the patrol circuit where the fourth dragon's attention was on the ravine where the third had gone down. He shouted. The soul absorption that followed was the fourth he had done since the Western Watchtower, each one making him incrementally more of what he was becoming. The temple complex was ahead. The word wall was in Skuldafn's inner sanctum. Not just any word wall, the specific wall that had been carved by the ancient heroes at this exact location. The Thu'um of Dragonren spoken into stone by Gormleth and Feldir and Haken after they had developed it on the throat of the world, preserved here at Alduin's own temple complex with the specific irony of the World Eater's stronghold containing the one weapon that could bring him to ground. The Dragonborn stood before it. The words glowed with the specific blue-white light that word walls produced when the Dovahkiin was present, the ancient carved stone recognizing its intended recipient, the Thu'um preserved in the rock reaching toward the being built to receive it. He absorbed the words. Jor, mortal, Za, finite, Frul, temporary. The concept of mortality, the mortal experience of knowing you would end, the specific weight of existing in time with a defined boundary, the thing that dragons by their immortal nature could not process or comprehend, spoken into a Thu'um that forced that concept into a dragon's mind and grounded them in the mortal plane by making them feel, briefly, what mortals felt. Alduin had never been on the receiving end of this shout. The ancient heroes had used it to bring him to ground at the throat of the world 4,000 years ago. The Dragonborn carried it now. Jor Za Frul, he said quietly. Not a shout. The words, unspoken at conversational register, feeling the specific weight of them in his mouth. The concept of mortality in 3 syllables. The specific weight of something that should feel like weakness and felt like anything but. He looked at Chief. I have it. The portal? Chief said. Behind the altar, the Dragonborn said. It will take me to Sovngarde, to Alduin's hunting ground. He paused. You can't follow me there. I know, Chief said. Shun, the portal closes behind the living, the Dragonborn said. It's a realm of the dead. The living enter under specific cosmological conditions. The Dovahkiin enters because fate has written it. Others, he paused. It would need to be rewritten. Halsey, Chief said into the comm. The portal to Sovngarde. Can the artifact's resonance? No, Halsey said. Before he finished, the portal operates on cosmological death realm mechanics that the artifact has no interface with. The Dovahkiin enters because they're designated by the architecture of Orbis. An external technology can't replicate that designation. A pause. He goes alone. Chief looked at the Dragonborn. The Dragonborn looked at him. "The ship needs to engage Alduin," the Dragonborn said. "Keep his attention on the orbital space. Every moment he's fighting the ship is a moment he's not in Sovngarde. His full presence needs to be in Sovngarde for the final confrontation. If he's split between the orbital engagement and his hunting ground." "He's weaker in both," Chief said. "Yes," the Dragonborn said. "And in Sovngarde, with the ancient heroes beside me and Dragonrend in my voice." He paused. "It's enough. It has to be enough." "It will be," Chief said. The Dragonborn looked at him for a moment. "You don't know that." "No," Chief said. "But you've absorbed 4 dragon souls in 3 days. You learned Dragonrend in 4 seconds. You're the only being in this world or mine who can do what needs doing." He paused. "That's not reassurance. That's the operational assessment." The Dragonborn absorbed this with the specific quality of someone receiving information that was accurate rather than comfortable, and deciding to carry it as the former rather than wish for the latter. "When this is over," he said, "if it works." "It works," Chief said. "If it works," the Dragonborn said again, with the specific insistence of someone who had been in enough situations where things didn't work to refuse the certainty. "There's a war here, the civil conflict, the Thalmor network your ship identified." He paused. "I don't know what comes next after Alduin. I've been pointed at Alduin since Helgen and haven't had the room to think past him." "You'll have room after," Chief said. "Will you still be here?" Chief was quiet for a moment. "Long enough to help," he said. "What happens after that is Lasky's call." The Dragonborn nodded. Once. The specific nod of someone accepting an honest answer rather than requiring a better one. He turned toward the portal. He went through it. Sovngarde was not what the Dragonborn had expected. Not the feasting hall, and the golden light, and the honored dead in eternal celebration that the Nordic myths described. Or rather, not only that, not the version of it that existed when the World Eater was absent from its sky. What he stepped into through the portal was a Sovngarde that Alduin had been feeding on for months. And the feeding had changed it the way any sustained consumption changed a thing. Had dimmed it. I had put a specific mist across the fields that the myths had not described, because the myths had been written in an age when the mist was not there, and the mist was Alduin's work, his hunting fog, the cosmological mechanism through which he located and consumed the souls of the honored dead before they could reach Shore's Hall. The Dragonborn stood at the portal's exit and looked at the mist and thought about what it meant that the realm of the honored dead was being consumed from inside, while the World Eater's resurrection campaign consumed everything outside. 2 fronts. Alduin had been running 2 fronts simultaneously. The Dragon Resurrection campaign in Nirn and the Soul Consumption campaign in Sovngarde, and had been running them with the specific sustained patience of a being who had devoured ages of the world before, and understood that the timeline of the World Eater was not measured in days or weeks, but in the accumulated weight of everything consumed. Months of this. The mist was thick at the portal's edge and thinned as he moved toward the high ground. The specific behavior of a predatory fog that was thinnest where the prey was absent and densest where the prey was most concentrated. He moved toward where it thinned and found what he was looking for at the base of a ridge that overlooked the misted fields. 3 figures, ancient armor, in the specific weathered quality of warriors who had died honorably and had been in Sovngarde long enough to have the afterlife's particular relationship with age. Not aging, not diminishing, but carrying the specific weight of time that the honored dead carried differently from the living. Gormla, Golden Hilt, Feldir the Old, Hakon, One Eye. The three ancient Nord heroes who had faced Alduin at the throat of the world 4,000 years ago, who had used the dragon-rend shout, the shout they had built from the mortal concept of mortality itself, to bring him to ground, who had failed to kill him because killing Alduin required a dragonborn, and there had been no dragonborn among them, only master tongues who had built the weapon that the Dovahkiin would one day need to use. They had been waiting, not passively. They had been fighting Alduin's soul consumption in Sovngarde since his return, in holding what could be held against a force that was consuming everything it found. Buying time for the moment that Arbis had been building toward since Alduin's return. The moment was now. Gormley looked at the Dragonborn with the assessment of a warrior who had spent 4,000 years in Sovngarde and knew what the Dovahkiin looked like when fate had finished pointing them in the right direction. "You found the wall," she said. "Yes," the Dragonborn said. "You have dragonrend." "Yes." "Then we go to the hall," she said. Shor himself has been holding the mist at the hall's edge. Even the World Eater cannot consume souls under the direct protection of the Sovereign of the Dead. But the fields beyond, she looked at the mist. Every soul he consumes in those fields is power he brings to the confrontation. She looked back at the Dragonborn. "We call him to the hall. We face him in the open air above Shor's domain. You use dragonrend to ground him. We keep him grounded long enough for you to take his soul." "That's the plan," the Dragonborn said. "That's what fate built you for," Gormla said. "Whether it's a plan is a different question." Above Nirn, in the orbital space that had been the site of Alduin's first direct engagement with Infinity 3 days prior, Lasky was doing what he had been doing since Master Chief reached Skuldafn, waiting for Alduin to move. The World Eater had been absent from Infinity's sensor envelope since the first engagement, withdrawn to wherever he went when he was not actively consuming souls or directing his resurrection army, the specific tactical patience of a being who operated on a timescale that made hours irrelevant. But the weapon had been tracking the Thu'um field's background resonance since arrival, and the resonance had a specific signature when Alduin was actively using his power, a distortion in the field saturation that corresponded to the World Eater's Thu'um discharge rate. The signature had been building for 2 hours. "He's coming," the weapon said. "All batteries to manual targeting," Lasky said. "Palmer, I need every Spartan not currently deployed with Chief on standby for boarding defense. If he gets close enough to breach the hull." "Understood," Palmer said. Halsey." He looked at the artifact station where Halsey had been working since the intelligence package had raised the question of what the artifact could do in the right hands. "Where are we?" Halsey looked up. Her expression was the expression she wore when she had been working a problem long enough to have reached the answer and was deciding how to present it in a way that accurately conveyed both the answer and its implications. The artifact's resonance nodes that failed in the first engagement. I've repaired 3 of the 4. The 4th is non-functional and will remain non-functional without manufacturing capability I don't have access to." She paused. "But 3 of 4 nodes gives me approximately 70% of the resonance output that the first engagement produced." She paused again. Which would not be sufficient to replicate the effect that fractured the artifact in the first engagement. But I have been working a different application. Tell me, Lasky said. The first engagement's resonance forced Alduin to assert his fundamental nature at full cosmological weight, Halsey said. The act of doing so cost him something, not physical damage, something at the cosmological level. The certainty of his own nature being challenged produced a specific kind of expenditure that his biology, his cosmological architecture, had to recover from. She looked at Lasky steadily. I can replicate that effect. Not the scale that fractured the artifact. A sustained version at lower amplitude. Instead of one large challenge that he asserts against and overcomes, a continuous low-level challenge that requires continuous assertion. Meaning he has to constantly spend energy defending what he is, Lasky said. Meaning he cannot give his full attention to anything else while the resonance is active, Halsey said. The sustained assertion requirement acts as a cognitive tax. It doesn't hurt him in the conventional sense. It divides him. She paused. Captain, if Alduin is simultaneously defending his cosmological nature against the artifact's resonance, directing his Thu'um against this ship's systems, and trying to maintain his presence in Sovngarde for the final confrontation with the Dragonborn, he's fighting 3 opponents at once, Lasky said. At 3 different layers of reality simultaneously, Halsey said. The physical layer, the cosmological layer, and the death realm layer. His attention and power divided 3 ways. She paused. I don't know if it's enough, but it's more than we had in the first engagement. Lasky looked at the tactical display, at the building Thu'um resonance signature, at the artifact on Halsey Station with 3 of 4 resonance nodes repaired, at the 6 kilometers of warship that had arrived in this universe through a World Eater's mistake and had spent 3 days learning what it was in. Activate it when he enters the engagement envelope, he said. Don't wait for him to fire first. Understood, Halsey said. Lasky looked at the comm. Chief. Sir, Chief said, from the surface below. The Pelican had brought him back to the Whiterun hold after the Skuldafn deployment. The operational decision that the Dragonborn going through the portal alone had produced, which was Chief having no immediate deployment objective, and therefore being available for whatever the engagement's ground-level requirements turned out to be. The Dragonborn is through the portal, Lasky said. Yes, Chief said. The ship is about to engage Alduin. The goal is sustained engagement. Keep him focused on us long enough for the Dragonborn to complete the confrontation in Sovngarde. Lasky paused. I need a ground-level assessment of what success looks like. If Alduin goes down in Sovngarde, if the Dragonborn takes his soul, what does that look like from down there? Chief looked at the sky, at the Thor's World mountain range visible to the east, but at the Thu'um field's ambient saturation that he had been developing a specific intuition for over 3 days of operating in an environment saturated by it. The specific quality of the field when it was running at normal background levels versus the elevated state it had been in since the Skuldafn deployment. He thought about what Arngir had said. The World Eater's connection to the breach is real. He created it. The creator of a dimensional anomaly is the party designated to resolve it. If Alduin's soul is absorbed, Chief said, the cosmological pressure that has been maintaining his dimensional connection, the breach he created when his Thu'um pulled us through, resolves. The obligation is discharged. He paused. Halsey would know better than me what that means for our slipspace options. It means the dimensional signature that pulled us here is no longer an active cosmological event, Halsey said. Which means the fabric of Orbis around it returns to its pre-breach state. Which means... She stopped. Which means, Lasky said. Which means the Forerunner artifact's connection to this universe's cosmological architecture, which has been mediated by the breach since our arrival, will also resolve, Halsey said. The artifact's resonance with the Thu'um field has been sustained by the breach's existence. The same cosmological connection that compels Alduin to address us has been maintaining the interface channel that the artifact uses to interact with the field. She paused. When Alduin dies, the breach closes. The interface closes. The artifact becomes inert, Lasky said. No longer interfacing with this universe's cosmological layer, Halsey said. Yes, another pause. But Captain, I extracted the dimensional signature before the breach closes. I have it. The return trajectory is calculated. She looked at him. We can go home after. Lasky absorbed this. After Alduin dies. After the Dragonborn takes his soul? Yes, Halsey said. The sequence is Alduin dies, breach closes, artifact loses interface capability. We have a window before the ambient field saturation drops too low to maintain the extraction signature. Approximately 4 hours. She paused. After 4 hours, the signature degrades beyond usability, and we need to find another method. Then we have a timeline, Lasky said. He looked at the tactical display. Alduin enters the engagement envelope in 7 minutes. We run the sustained resonance, we divide his attention, we buy the Dragonborn the time he needs. He paused. And then we go home. Yes, Halsey said. Lasky looked at the planet below. Yeah, at the medieval world, with the cosmological energy field that had no equivalent in any universe he had been trained to operate in. At the pre-industrial civilization, fighting its civil war, and its dragon war, and its Thalmor intelligence operation simultaneously. At the specific shape of a world that was harder than it looked in every way that mattered. All stations, he said. This is the captain. We are entering a sustained engagement with the entity designated Alduin. Our objective is to divide his attention and his power across multiple engagement layers simultaneously, providing the Dragonborn, our ground asset, the operational space to complete the confrontation in Sovngarde. He paused. This ship did not come to this universe to conquer it or to save it. We came through an accident, and we have been operating in it for 3 days with the best judgment we have. What we do in the next few hours determines whether we go home with the right story about what this crew is capable of. Another pause. Stations ready. The confirmations came back across every department. Lasky looked at the tactical display. Alduin entered the engagement envelope. In Sovngarde, the Dragonborn called him. Not with words, with the Thu'um, the specific cosmological signal of a Dovahkiin at the edge of Shore's Hall, projecting their presence into the misted fields with the voice that Arbis had been building for a mortal lifetime. The call that Alduin would feel through every layer of the cosmological architecture he was woven into, the specific frequency of the World Eater's obligation made audible. Come and face your end. The mist moved. It did not dissipate. It concentrated, the specific gathering behavior of a predatory fog responding to its master's intent. The cosmological mechanism that Alduin used to locate souls in Sovngarde, pulling itself toward the source of the disturbance. And through the mist, in the gray air above Shore's Hall, Alduin came. Not the orbital presence that Infinity's sensors had been tracking. This was Alduin in Sovngarde, his domain, the realm where he had been feeding for months, where the landscape itself responded to his presence the way a room responded to the presence of the person who owned it. He was larger here than in the orbital engagement, or appeared larger. The Death Realm's cosmological architecture scaling to the World Eater's nature in ways that the physical realm did not. His eyes found the Dragonborn immediately. The gaze of an immortal divine dragon on the singular mortal who carried the one capability that constituted a genuine threat to its continued existence. The specific focused attention of something that had been hunting this target since Helgen, and had been prevented from reaching it by a sequence of events that had not been in its calculation. Dovahkiin, Alduin said, in the dragon tongue, in the Thu'um, in the language of creation, his name for the Dragonborn carrying the cosmological weight of a divine being, acknowledging a mortal as worthy of address. You come to your death. I come to yours, the Dragonborn said. Alduin dove, Infinity's artifact activated at 15:03 hours. Halsey ran the sustained resonance at 70% of the first engagement's amplitude. Not the sharp challenge that had forced Alduin to assert his fundamental nature at full output, but the continuous low-level version that required continuous low-level assertion. The cosmological tax, the dividing mechanism. Alduin felt it. In Sovngarde, mid-dive, the World Eater felt the artifact's sustained resonance as the specific sensation of his fundamental nature being questioned at a level he could not simply override. The same challenge the first engagement had produced, but sustained rather than sharp, requiring the continuous assertion of self against the continuous questioning of self in a way that the first engagement's single assertion had not required. He adjusted. He did not abandon the Sovngarde dive. He could not. The Dragonborn was there. Dragonrend was coming. The final confrontation that fate had been building toward was at this moment, in this place. And the World Eater had been running from it for 4,000 years through temporal banishment, and was not going to run from it now. But the adjustment required spending something. Attention divided. The orbital resonance requiring a portion of his cosmological processing that the Sovngarde confrontation needed. The dive hit the Dragonborn's position a fraction of a second slow, the specific fraction that the divided attention produced, and the fraction was enough. Jorza Frul, the Dragonborn's Dragonrend, hit Alduin mid-dive with the full cosmological weight of the concept of mortality spoken by a Dovahkiin, who had been absorbing dragon souls for 3 days, and who carried, in the accumulated weight of those absorptions, the compressed mortal experience of every dragon whose essence now resided in his. Alduin hit the ground of Sovngarde. For the first time in 4,000 years, the World Eater was grounded. Igormle was already moving. The ancient hero's blade finding the gaps in the World Eater's armor with the specific combat knowledge of a warrior who had faced him before and had spent 4,000 years in Sovngarde adding to that knowledge. Feldir's shout hit Alduin's exposed flank. Hakon engaged from the other side. Alduin fought back. He fought with the specific, desperate fury of an immortal divine being that had been brought to mortal ground, and was finding that the ground was less favorable than the sky. His Thu'um tearing apart the fields of Sovngarde around him, his physical combat capability still formidable, even grounded. The ancient heroes taking damage that would have destroyed lesser warriors. The Dragonborn moved through it. Not around it, through it. The specific, committed movement of someone who had decided that the path from where they were to where they needed to be went directly through the most dangerous thing on the field, and that the most dangerous thing on the field was therefore not an obstacle, but the route. He shouted again. Jor za Frul. Second application of Dragon Rend. Alduin had recovered partially from the first, the immortal nature reasserting itself against the mortal concept forced into his mind. So the Thu'um's cosmological architecture, fighting back against the concept it was designed to reject. The second application hit the recovery's midpoint. The specific timing of a tongue who had been watching the shout's effect and had calculated the recovery interval with the same attentive precision he applied to everything. Alduin went down again. In orbit, Infinity's Mac batteries fired and missed by the fraction that Alduin's adaptation had opened and fired again at the adapted solution that the weapon had generated in the interval, and hit by the fraction that the sustained resonance's division of attention had cost the World Eater's adaptation speed. The damage accumulated. Not enough to kill, not capable of killing, but enough to cost. The physical damage adding to the cosmological tax of the sustained resonance, adding to the Dragon Rend's mortality concept, adding to the three-way division of a divine being's attention across three simultaneous engagement layers. Alduin was losing, not the battle. The World Eater was still fighting, still formidable, still the most powerful being in Nirn's cosmological architecture. But the specific resource that the battle was consuming, the certainty of his own nature, the cosmological authority of an immortal divine being operating from a position of absolute self-knowledge, was being spent down by three simultaneous challenges in ways that no single challenge could have produced. He turned on the Dragonborn. Full attention. The portion of his processing that had been managing the orbital resonance and the ancient heroes directed at the singular mortal who carried the weapon that mattered. The decision of a commander who had assessed the three-front battle and determined that eliminating the most critical threat was worth the cost of dropping the other two. He was faster without the division. The first strike hit the Dragonborn before the third Dragon Rend could be deployed. A physical strike, wing-powered. The specific combat move of a grounded dragon using its remaining mobility to get inside the shout's deployment range. The impact sent the Dragonborn across the field of Sovngarde with the specific physics of something massive and fast making contact with something considerably smaller. Gormla threw herself at Alduin's exposed flank. Feldir shouted. Hakon's blade found the gap that 4,000 years of study had identified. The Dragonborn stood, not quickly, with the specific determined quality of someone who had taken the kind of impact that ended most engagements and was standing because standing was what the situation required, regardless of what the impact's physics suggested about the wisdom of standing. He drew breath. He felt the four dragon souls in him, the accumulated power of four absorbed essences, the compressed cosmological weight of four ancient beings whose existence now resided in the mortal vessel that fate had built for exactly this purpose. He felt the dragon rend in him, the concept of mortality in 3 syllables, the specific weight of the mortal experience of ending, the thing that dragons couldn't comprehend and that he carried with every mortal breath. He felt the 5th soul waiting, Alduin's, the largest, the oldest, the firstborn of Akatosh, the soul that the Dovahkiin had been built to absorb, the specific cosmological purpose of the mortal dragon-soul combination that the divine architecture of Orbis had spent a lifetime preparing. He looked at the World Eater, at the ancient divine dragon that had devoured ages of the world and had been doing it again, and had been stopped by a sequence of events that had included a warship from another universe, and a Spartan in green armor, and an AI who had read the cosmological architecture of this universe from sensor data, and a scientist who had repaired an artifact and run a sustained resonance that had divided the World Eater's attention across 3 simultaneous engagement layers, at the being that fate had pointed him toward since before Helgen. "Yor Za Frul," he said, the 3rd dragon rend. Deployed at the range that the impact had produced, closer than the optimal range, closer than training would have advised, the specific proximity that standing from an Alduin strike and shouting before the recovery was complete, produced. Close enough that the mortality concept hit Alduin's cosmological architecture at point-blank range. The World Eater went down for the 3rd time and did not recover before the Dragonborn reached him. The soul absorption lasted 47 seconds. The weapon measured it from the orbital position, the specific cosmological energy discharge that accompanied every Dovahkiin soul absorption, visible on Infinity's sensors as a disruption in the Thu'um field saturation in the Sovngarde adjacent cosmological layer, a reading that had no standard classification in any sensor library, and that the weapon had been developing a framework for over 3 days of continuous observation. This one was different from the others, not in the mechanism, in the scale. The energy discharge of a Dovahkiin absorbing 4 previous dragon souls, absorbing a 5th, and not any 5th, but the firstborn of Akatosh, the World Eater whose cosmological architecture was woven into the foundational structure of Orbis itself. The discharge hit the Thu'um field saturation like a stone dropped into still water. Not a ripple, but a wave, moving through the field in every direction simultaneously, felt by every living being in Nirn that had any sensitivity to the cosmological layer. Every dragon in Skyrim felt it. They felt it the way they had felt Alduin's resurrection, Thu'um, through the cosmological network that connected dragonkind, the shared architecture of their nature, registering the World Eater's absence as the sudden cessation of a pressure that had been present for as long as any of them could remember. The resurrection campaign ended, not through a command or a defeat, through the specific cosmological resolution of the organizing principle that had been directing it. Alduin's absence from the network was the end of the campaign, because the campaign was Alduin's will expressed through the network. Owen and Alduin's will was no longer present in the network. The dragons that had been attacking settlements across Skyrim's holds stopped. Not immediately, not uniformly. The specific uneven deceleration of a military force whose command authority has been removed rather than its capability, some continuing from momentum, and some stopping mid-approach, and some landing in confusion on the nearest available surface. On the throat of the world, Paarthurnax felt it. He was the elder dragon who had turned against Alduin centuries ago, who had been living among the graybeards in the practice of the Thu'um's contemplative tradition, who had been the specific anomaly of a dragon who had chosen a different path from the one Alduin had set for dragonkind. He felt the World Eater's absence in the network with a complexity of response that would have been difficult to name in any language. The specific emotional texture of something that had been at war with the organizing principle of its own nature for centuries and had just felt that principle removed. He looked at the sky, at the moving star that had been in Nuren's orbit for 3 days. He spoke in the dragon tongue into the open air, not a shout, a word, a single word, drem, peace, the specific Nordic dragon word for the state that existed when the violence was finished. On Infinity's bridge, the weapon translated it. Lasky heard it. He looked at the tactical display, at the Thu'um field saturation returning to its background level, at the dragon activity signatures across the northern continent decelerating towards stillness, at the dimensional breach resonance that had been present in the sensor data since arrival, the specific signature of the cosmological connection between Alduin's Thu'um and the slipspace transit, resolving as the World Eater's cosmological architecture ceased to generate it. "The breach is closing," the weapon said. "The Dragonborn absorbed Alduin's soul. The cosmological obligation is discharged. The dimensional signature is degrading. 4 hours to extraction window closure." "Navigation," Lasky said. "Return trajectory calculated," Sparks said. "Slipspace drive ready, waiting on your order." Lasky looked at the planet below for a long moment. "Not yet," he said. Sparks looked at him. "Chief," Lasky said into the comm, "Alduin is down. The Dragonborn succeeded." "I know," Chief said. "I felt it." "I need 48 hours before we transit," Lasky said. There's work." Chief looked at the sky from the Whiterun approach, where he had been standing since the engagement began, watching the specific quality of the air change as the dragon activity across the northern hold decelerated towards stillness. "What kind of work?" "The Thalmor intelligence network," Lasky said. "The weapon has the complete picture of their Skyrim operation. The asset list, the communication history, the intelligence packages they were preparing for transmission to the Aldmeri Dominion, including the complete analysis of the artifact Thu'um interface and their tower destruction proposal." He paused. "If that information reaches the Aldmeri Dominion before we leave, everything we've done here has a consequence we didn't intend. The Thalmor scholars have developed a theoretical framework for using cosmological technology to unmake this world's foundational anchors. They built it from observing us." Another pause. "We need to ensure it doesn't reach the people who would use it." "And the Dragonborn," Chief said. "He comes back through the portal when the confrontation is complete. He's going to need someone to brief him on what's waiting on the other side of Alduin," Lasky said. "Yes." He paused. "Stay on the surface. I'm sending Palmer down with a full Spartan team. You have 48 hours. Chief looked at Whiterun's walls, at the guards who had stopped watching for dragons and were watching the sky for different reasons. The specific quality of people who had just felt something change in the world they inhabited and were still determining what the change meant for tomorrow. "Understood," he said. The Dragonborn came back through the portal at 1847 hours, and not the same as he had gone in. The specific changed quality of someone who had done the thing that their entire existence had been building toward and was now standing on the other side of it in the specific silence that followed the end of the thing that had defined you, not diminished, changed. The way things changed when they completed rather than ended. He stood at the portal's exit at Skuldafn for a moment and looked at the sky, at the moving star that was still there, at the specific quality of Nirn's sky without the World Eater's cosmological pressure shaping it, lighter, in a way that was not physical, but that the field saturation registered as lighter. The ambient Thu'um of the world breathing at a different rate without the World Eater's presence compressing it. Paarthurnax had flown to Skuldafn. He was on the ridge above the temple complex, watching the Dragonborn emerge from the portal with the ancient intelligence of a being that had been waiting for this specific outcome for a very long time and was now processing its arrival with the patience that 4,000 years of practice produced. "It is done," Paarthurnax said. "Yes," the Dragonborn said. "You carry him." Yes. Paarthurnax was quiet for a moment. "He was the firstborn of Akatosh," he said. "Whatever you are now, carrying that, you are different from what you were when you entered the portal." "I know," the Dragonborn said. "Does it change what you intend to do?" The Dragonborn looked at the sky, at the moving star, at the pelican that was descending from the cloud layer towards Skuldafn's approach, Master Chief coming to meet him, the specific punctuality of a soldier for whom arriving when needed was a professional standard rather than a courtesy. "No," he said. "There's still work." Paarthurnax made the sound that ancient dragons made when they processed information that confirmed an assessment they had already reached. "The being from beyond," he said. "The green warrior. He stays?" "For a while," the Dragonborn said. "What does a while mean to a being from beyond the stars?" The Dragonborn watched the pelican descend. "Long enough to help," he said. "That's what he told me." "It is enough," Paarthurnax said. "It is exactly as much as this situation requires, and no more, which is..." He paused with the specific weight of a dragon, choosing the right word from a language that had been old when humans first began speaking. Appropriate. The 48 hours were the most productive hours Lasky had spent in Nirn's orbit. The weapon's complete picture of the Thalmor intelligence network, cross-referenced with Infinity's sensor data and the Dragonborn's operational knowledge of Skyrim's political landscape, produced the most comprehensive intelligence picture of the Aldmeri Dominion's Skyrim operation that had ever existed. The Dragonborn used it with the specific applied efficiency of someone who had been navigating Skyrim's political complexity for months and now had, for the first time, the complete map of who was doing what and why. The Whiterun asset was identified and removed from operation. The Markarth Justiciar team was located through the communication crystal network that the weapon had been reading since the Skuldafn deployment, and their intelligence cache was recovered before transmission. The Windhelm element was the most significant, the highest clearance Thalmor field team in Skyrim, operating with direct authorization from the Aldmeri Dominion's Central Command, and carrying the complete compiled intelligence package that Elenwen had been building since Infinity's arrival. The package included the artifact Thuum interface analysis and the tower destruction proposal. Palmer's Spartan team reached the Windhelm element at 0340 hours on the 47th hour. The package was recovered. Elenwen was taken into custody by the Imperial government, not through Infinity's direct action, but through the specific mechanism of the Imperial government receiving, through a channel that the Dragonborn had established, the complete picture of the Thalmor's intelligence operation in Skyrim, and the specific documentation of what Elenwen had been planning to do with the Sky Object's technology. The Imperial government responded with the specific urgency of a political institution that had just learned how comprehensively it had been surveilled by its nominal ally. The Thalmor network in Skyrim did not collapse in 48 hours. Networks built over decades did not collapse in 48 hours. But its command structure was compromised, its intelligence cache recovered, its most sensitive operational data removed from the environment, and its capacity to threaten the dimensional transit window closed. It was enough. The Dragonborn met Chief at the base of Whiterun's walls on the morning of the 48th hour, not because they had arranged to meet there. Because the base of Whiterun's walls was where things had been arranged for them. The specific geography of a story that had needed two particular people to meet in a particular place, and had produced the meeting by putting a dragon attack in the market district at the moment when both of them were in range of it. The civil war was still running. Not visibly, the immediate area was quiet. The specific quiet of a region that had been holding its breath during the dragon crisis and was now releasing it. Not resolved, but paused. The political tensions that had been driving the conflict still present and still building toward whatever resolution the conflict's own momentum would eventually produce. Infinity had not resolved the civil war. Infinity had not tried. The civil war was not Infinity's to resolve. It was Skyrim's. And Skyrim would resolve it in its own time through its own dynamics. What Infinity had done was remove one of the external factors that had been shaping those dynamics. The Thalmor had been provoking and sustaining the civil conflict for their own purposes, keeping both sides fighting, keeping the Empire weak, keeping Skyrim destabilized as part of the long-term tower destruction objective, into removing the Thalmor network's operational capability in Skyrim, removed that sustained interference from the conflict's environment. What happened next was Skyrim's to determine. "You're leaving," the Dragonborn said. 4-hour window, Chief said. "Lasky needs to transit before the dimensional signature degrades." "Will you come back?" Chief looked at the sky, at the orbital position where Infinity was running its pre-transit checklist, at the planet that had been operating on completely different rules from the ones he had been trained for, and that had turned out to be different rather than lesser, harder rather than primitive, worth knowing rather than worth conquering. "That's Lasky's call," he said. "And if it were yours?" Chief was quiet for a moment that had the specific weight of his previous answer to this question, and the specific additional weight of 48 hours of working in Skyrim after the Alduin confrontation had added to his understanding of what this world was. "Yes," he said. "If it were my call, yes." The Dragonborn held out his hand, not the gesture of a man who had learned it from another culture and was applying it correctly. The gesture of a warrior who had watched someone extend the same gesture at the end of a shared operational experience and understood what it meant in the specific language of soldiers who did not have the words for what the experience had been, but had this. Chief looked at the hand. He took it. 2 seconds. The same as Mael's handshake in a completely different story on a completely different dying world. The same duration, the same meaning. The recognition of a shared operational experience between two warriors from different realities who had found, in the collision of those realities, the specific common ground of people who understood what needed doing and did it. "Keep the world intact," Chief said. "You said that before," the Dragonborn said. "Still true," Chief said. He activated his jump pack. He rose through Whiterun's cold morning air. He passed through the cloud layer. He was gone. The slipspace portal opened above Nirn at 0412 hours on the 48th day. The Infinity passed through it with the controlled velocity of a ship that knew exactly where it was going and had been waiting for the moment when going there became possible. The portal closed behind it with the specific finality of a dimensional breach resolving, the cosmological connection between the two universes that Alduin's Thu'um had created completing its closure, the fabric of Aurbis reasserting its standard geometry, the ambient field saturation in Nirn's atmosphere returning to the background resonance it maintained when no external cosmological connection was drawing on it. The sky above Skyrim was the same gray ash-filtered light it had been before the rupture opened. The moving star was gone. The Dragonborn stood on Whiterun's wall and looked at the place in the sky where it had been and felt the specific quality of an absence that was not loss. The absence of something that had been present for a purpose and had departed having served that purpose. The way a tool was absent when the work was done, rather than the way a thing was absent when it was taken. The civil war was still running. The dragons that had survived Alduin's fall were still in Skyrim's airspace. Not the Resurrection Army, not the World Eater's deployed force, but the ancient surviving population of dragon kind that predated the Resurrection campaign. The ones who had been present before Alduin's return and who were now navigating a world where the organizing principle of their existence was gone. And the specific question of what came next was one that Paarthurnax was in the process of addressing from the throat of the world. The College of Winterhold had 3 years of research questions generated by Infinity's arrival that its scholars were going to spend the next decade working through. The companions had the specific operational experience of a joint engagement with a being from beyond the stars filed in their hall's history as the most unusual entry since the founding. And the Dragonborn had the work. Always the work. He turned from the wall and went back to it, through Whiterun's gate and into the market district where the dragon had died, and where the stone was still scorched from the fire breath in the specific permanent way of heat damage to old stone, at the record that the engagement had left in the world it had happened in. He looked at the scorch marks for a moment. Then he went to find out what Jarl Balgruuf needed. Because the civil war needed addressing. Because the Thalmor network's compromised state created a political window that closed if not used. Because Paarthurnax needed support in whatever he was building among the surviving dragons. Because there were people in Skyrim who needed what the Dragonborn was. Not the weapon against Alduin that was done, but the specific thing he was the rest of the time, which was the person who showed up when the situation required someone to show up, and did what the situation required before asking whether it was a good idea. The work was always there, and the work was always worth doing. That was what it meant to be the Dovahkiin after the Dragon War was over, not the ending. The continuation, the specific committed continuation of someone who had completed the thing that fate had pointed them toward and had turned around and found that there was more pointing to be done, and had decided that the pointing was not a burden, but but a purpose. And that purpose was not something you finished, but something you carried. He carried it. He always had. He always would. 3 weeks later, the College of Winterhold received a delivery. Not through conventional means, not a courier, not a merchant caravan, not any of the standard channels through which the college received the rare texts and artifacts that its research required. Through the sky, a small object, metal, smooth, rectangular, descending on a trajectory that was controlled rather than ballistic, landing in the college's central courtyard at dawn with the specific gentleness of something that had been delivered rather than dropped. Mirabelle Irvine, the master wizard, picked it up. It was warm to the touch, not from the descent, from something internal, the specific warmth of a device that was still running whatever it was built to run. There was a note attached. Not in any language the college had in its library. The college spent 3 months translating it. When they did, the note said 3 things. The first, this device contains a record of our observations of your world's cosmological field from orbital position. It is incomplete. We didn't understand what we were looking at until we were leaving. But it's honest. Use it however you find useful. The second, the Forerunner technology that interfaced with your Thuum, we're still studying the interaction. We don't understand it yet. We think that's appropriate. Some things should take a long time to understand. The third, if you ever find a way to reach us, we would like to know how this ends. Mirabelle read it 3 times. Then she took it to the Archmage. The Archmage read it once. He looked out the window at Skyrim's gray sky and thought about the star that had moved for 48 days and then stopped moving and then been gone. He thought about what it meant that something from beyond the stars had been here and had left a record of what it had seen and had asked to know how it ended. He thought about the ending. He thought about the continuation. He set the note down and looked at Mirabelle. "Find the Dragonborn," he said. "Why?" she said. "Because whoever left this is going to come back eventually," he said. "And when they do, I want someone here who can tell them the story from the beginning." He paused. "And the Dragonborn is the only one who knows the whole thing." Mirabelle looked at the note, at the device from beyond the stars sitting on the Archmage's desk, at the sky outside the window. She went to find the Dragonborn. Alduin the World Eater is dead. The Thalmor network in Skyrim is compromised. The civil war continues. The dragons are still in the sky. And somewhere in a universe that Nirn scholars have no name for. A scientist named Halsey is reading a research document she classified above standard distribution clearance. And an AI called the Weapon is running continuous analysis on 63 days of cosmological field data. And a soldier in green armor is standing at a viewport looking at the stars, thinking about a world where the sky speaks, thinking about a Dragonborn who carried a World Eater's soul and kept fighting, thinking about what it meant that the most powerful individual he had ever fought beside had been chosen by a god, and whether the device he left at the College of Winterhold would ever produce an answer. Some doors, once opened, don't close. Even when the ship goes home, even when the star stops moving, the connection remains. In the Thu'um field's ambient resonance, in the Forerunner artifact's residual signature, in the scorch marks on Whiterun's Market District stones, in the record that Nirn left in the hull of a warship that was never supposed to be there. and in the specific changed quality of a Dragonborn who carried 5 dragon souls instead of 4. The 5th, the largest, the firstborn of a god, carried now by the mortal who had been built to carry it, going back to work, because the work was always there, and the work was always worth doing, no matter what it cost, no matter what moved in the sky. May the Force be with you. More stories await.